My name is Ethan Caldwell, and for almost 6 years, I was the senior account manager at Grayson and Bell Financial, a corporate consultancy headquartered in downtown Chicago. From the outside, my life looked stable, respectable even. I had a steady paycheck, a neat apartment on the 24th floor of a high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan, and a title that impressed my parents enough to brag about it at dinner parties. But if you ask me what I felt when I swiped my badge at the glass entrance each morning, the truth was simpler: dread. My routine started at 6:15 a.m. sharp, when the dull alarm on my phone would shudder me awake. I'd lie in bed for 10 minutes, staring at the ceiling, already mentally preparing for the barrage of emails waiting in my inbox. Some days, I'd open them while brushing my teeth just to get ahead of the anxiety. Others, I'd avoid looking until I was in the elevator, my heart hammering in my chest. My boss, Darren McCleary, believed urgency was a virtue, and his leadership style could best be described as perpetual crisis. If he sent you an email at 5 a.m., you were expected to reply before your first cup of coffee. I'd never intended to spend this long at Grayson and Bell. I'd graduated from Northwestern with a degree in finance and an idea that I'd stay here maybe a year or two, save some money, and move on to a smaller boutique firm where I could have real impact. But then the promotions came, more title than raise, and the praise that felt like an addictive drug. I told myself I was building something, a career, a reputation. But the higher I climbed, the emptier it felt. Each morning, I walked through the revolving door into the lobby with its marble floors and abstract sculptures meant to impress visiting clients. The security guard, Miguel, would nod at me, always cheerful, always greeting me by name. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell," he'd say. "You're in early again." "Yeah," I'd mumble. Got a head start to catch. He'd give me a sympathetic smile, and for a moment, I'd feel a pang of envy for his straightforward job. No PowerPoint decks, no screaming clients threatening to pull millions in accounts. My department was on the 12th floor, a sprawling maze of cubicles punctuated by glass-walled offices reserved for managers. My cubicle was bigger than most, a concession to my senior status, but the walls still felt like they were closing in on me. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed constantly, and some days I imagined that the sound was slowly rewiring my brain. By 7 a.m., the office was mostly empty except for a few overachievers like Lila Chin, the junior analyst who always arrived early to impress Darren. She'd give me a small, nervous wave whenever I passed her desk. She was kind, in that hesitant way people can be when they're terrified to step out of line. We were all terrified in one way or another. What I wanted most was freedom, a chance to use my skills to build something meaningful. But every time I thought about leaving, about turning in my badge, I'd picture the stunned look on my father's face. My dad, Alan Caldwell, worked 30 years at the same insurance company. He'd retired with a pension, a gold watch, and a sense that he'd fulfilled his duty. To him, quitting was failure. Sometimes I tried to explain how different it was for my generation, how loyalty rarely meant job security, how burnout was practically a rite of passage. He'd nod politely, but I could tell he didn't understand. My mom, Janice, would listen quietly on speakerphone, occasionally murmuring that she was proud of me no matter what. But even her reassurances couldn't drown out the voice in my head that called me ungrateful. On the rare occasions I took time for myself, I'd meet my best friend, Jordan Reeves, for drinks at a bar near Wabash. Jordan ran a small marketing consultancy and was everything I wanted to be: independent, energized, and, most importantly, free. He'd listen patiently as I vented about Darren's endless demands and the soul-crushing routine. "Ethan," he'd say, swirling his glass of bourbon, "you know you're allowed to walk away, right? No one's chaining you to that place." "I know," I'd reply, though I never fully believed it. "It's just complicated." "It always is," he'd say, "until you decide it isn't." Afterward, I'd ride the train home feeling equal parts inspired and ashamed. I wanted to believe I had the courage to quit, but the thought of throwing away everything I'd worked for made my stomach twist. So I kept showing up, day after day, telling myself that things would get better if I could just hold on a little longer. But the signs that something was wrong were growing harder to ignore. In January, our largest client, Haverly Tech, slashed their contracts by half. The rumor mill insisted the company's finances were shakier than management let on. Meanwhile, Darren's temper had reached new heights. He'd stormed down the aisles of cubicles, red-faced and barking orders. People were quitting almost every month, sometimes without notice. HR would send out polite emails thanking them for their service, but no one ever said why they left. It was during one of those early mornings that something happened I couldn't explain. I'd arrived at my desk at 6:30 a.m., hoping to get a head start on a presentation Darren demanded the night before. My computer screen flickered once, twice, and then went black. When it came back to life, an email I'd never seen before was open on the screen. Subject: Get out while you can. There was no sender, no signature, just those 6 words. I blinked, thinking I must have imagined it. But when I refreshed the screen, the message vanished. I tried searching for it, but it was gone as if it had never existed. I told myself it must have been a glitch, a trick of exhaustion. Still, all day, the words replayed in my mind. That night, I lay awake in my bed, staring at the dark ceiling.
Get out while you can.
The warning felt too precise to dismiss as coincidence. I thought about Jordan, about the co-workers who'd vanished without a word, about the cracks beginning to show in the company's polished facade. My heart pounded against my ribs, and I knew, somewhere deep down, that everything was about to change. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. The next morning, I put on my suit, straightened my tie, and walked back into Grayson and Bell as though nothing had happened. I told myself that whatever the message was, I could handle it. After all, I'd survived this place for 6 years. How much worse could it get? The day after my outburst at Atlas Consulting felt eerily calm. I expected a barrage of texts, emails, or maybe even a cease and desist, something dramatic to match my stormy exit. But silence wrapped itself around me like a straitjacket. And in that stillness, something began to unravel. Something I hadn't expected. It started with a message from Leah. Check Atlas's website. Something weird is going on. I clicked the link and was greeted with a simple white screen and a message. Scheduled maintenance. Please check back later. Strange. Atlas never went down, ever. The IT department prided itself on its uptime. The site was our digital front door, and for it to vanish overnight meant something serious had gone wrong. I messaged Leah. Did someone quit in IT too?
She didn't respond.
That was strange too. Hours passed, and the silence started to take shape. Not just digital silence, but human silence. My LinkedIn started buzzing. Messages from former clients, partners, even interns I hadn't spoken to in years. Heard you left Atlas. What happened? Did you know the VP just resigned? You called it, man. Something shady's happening. And then the biggest shock of all. Atlas Consulting is under investigation by the SEC. That headline hit like a gut punch. I stared at the screen, rereading it 3, maybe 4 times. It was surreal. Just days ago, I was the one under fire for raising concerns about fraudulent client invoicing and project padding, and now the whole company was being dragged into the spotlight. The articles were vague at first. Sources claimed a whistleblower had leaked internal documents. No names were mentioned, but deep down I knew I was the match. 2 days later, Leah showed up at my door. Can we talk? She asked, eyes darting nervously behind her. I think my phone's being monitored. I let her in, and she spoke in a whisper. Remember that spreadsheet you gave me? The one with the contract anomalies? I kept a copy. I didn't mean to go behind your back, but I sent it to someone. Who? My cousin. She's a paralegal at a firm that deals with corporate fraud. She thought it was worth looking into. My mouth went dry. Leah, that could tie you into this. I don't care. After you left, things got worse. The partners started shredding files, pulling interns into closed-door meetings, asking them to backdate documents. It's all coming down, Ethan. That night, I barely slept. My emotions were a tangle of satisfaction, fear, and panic. Had I started a corporate war? Was I now a whistleblower without meaning to be? Over the next week, The situation escalated quickly. 3 VPs resigned within 48 hours. The company suspended all new client onboarding. Employees were issued NDAs and retention packages, desperate attempts to stop the bleeding. But the damage was already done. Leah kept me updated from the inside. She was still attending Zoom calls, now recorded and monitored. HR reps were being oddly evasive. Someone wiped the company's Slack archives clean overnight. Meanwhile, I received a cryptic email from an anonymous Gmail address. "We know you're the one who left with the files. Your silence is valuable. Name your price." I stared at the screen, unsure if it was a threat or a bribe. Before I could even respond, another email came, this time from a law firm representing a former Atlas client. "Mr. Reed, we understand you have knowledge relevant to a pending case against Atlas Consulting. Would you be willing to provide a sworn statement?" Now it was real. My departure had stirred something bigger than I could have ever imagined. I met with their investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Camille Morris. She asked me everything: how I discovered the contract tampering, how long it had been going on, who was involved. I gave them everything I had, including the files I downloaded before walking out. It was all backed up, encrypted, and buried in a drive I kept locked away. Camille tapped her pen. "You do realize this puts you at risk. They'll come after you, discredit you, possibly sue." "Let them try," I said. "I'm not the one who broke the law." But even as I said it, my hands trembled. Days later, Leah messaged again. "They're investigating everyone, even people who had nothing to do with the fraud. It's like a witch hunt in there. Leave, Leah. You've done enough." "I can't yet. Not until I find out what they did with the ghost accounts. There's more, Ethan. Something even worse." "Ghost accounts?" She explained that during a late-night audit, she'd uncovered several client records that didn't match billing history, fake companies that had paid large sums into Atlas's ledgers, but had no point of contact. No projects. No staff. "It's money laundering, Ethan." The words were heavy. I sat back, stunned. The fraud wasn't just about inflated invoices. Atlas was laundering money through shell clients. "How do you know for sure?" "I copied the logs. But if they find out, I'm screwed." I realized then, this wasn't just a company collapsing from internal corruption. This was potentially federal. Leah and I met again, this time in a quiet corner of an old coffee shop downtown. She handed me a thumb drive, sealed in a cheap black envelope. "Keep it somewhere safe," she said. "And if anything happens to me, take it to Camille." I didn't ask if she was scared. I could see it in her face. "Why are you still doing this?" I asked. "Because when you walked out of that office, you gave me the courage to open my eyes. I was part of something ugly and I want out. But I won't run. Not yet." Her words hit hard. I had left in anger, but she stayed behind, in danger, to help expose the truth. 1 week later, Atlas's CEO was arrested at JFK Airport. The news spread like wildfire. It turned out the SEC had been watching Atlas for over a year, but they lacked the evidence to move forward, until now. The documents Leah uncovered, combined with my records, formed the missing link. Together, they proved a pattern of financial misconduct, ghost billing, offshore transfers, and fake entities used to siphon millions through fake consulting contracts. Clients pulled out. The media exploded. Investors filed lawsuits. By the end of the week, Atlas's valuation had dropped by 85%. My phone rang nonstop, news outlets, attorneys, and even old coworkers wanting to catch up. But I stayed quiet. I watched the empire crumble. And part of me felt vindicated. But it wasn't over. Leah called one last time. "They're trying to pin it on me," she whispered. "They said I leaked confidential information without authorization. Lawyers will protect you. Camille knows what you did. They're offering hush money, Ethan. 50 grand. To disappear." My jaw clenched. "Don't take it." "I won't. But I'm scared. I've got your back." We were in this together now. Unintentional whistleblowers, corporate saboteurs, or just two people who finally said enough. One morning, I walked past the old Atlas building, darkened windows, a padlock on the front entrance. A for lease sign swung quietly in the breeze. I stopped and stared, a chill running down my spine. This was where I spent 6 years building someone else's dream. This was where I sacrificed weekends, birthdays, and relationships just to climb a ladder that led nowhere. Now it was gone. Not with a bang, but with the whisper of truth finally spoken. And somewhere inside me, a strange calm settled in. Maybe I hadn't quit in the worst way possible. Maybe I'd done the only thing I could. I sat on the edge of my bed that Sunday morning, the laptop perched on my knees as I scrolled through a dozen emails. Even after what I'd done, walking out of Blackridge Consulting in spectacular fashion, I still felt a compulsion to look for any sign of fallout. Some part of me needed to witness the aftermath, to see if the building had truly begun to shake as I'd predicted. The previous week had been chaos. After the HR meeting that ended with me flinging my badge onto the conference room table and announcing to everyone that Blackridge was a sinking ship, I'd expected nothing but fury and possibly legal threats. Instead, the silence was almost eerie. No calls. No messages. Nothing. It felt like the eye of a storm I'd unwittingly summoned. I refreshed my inbox for the 10th time. A single new subject line appeared, concerned about your claims. It was from Nathan Caldwell, Blackridge's chief operating officer, and one of the few people I'd ever respected there. My stomach twisted as I opened it. Subject: concerned about your claims. From Nathan Caldwell to Olivia James. Olivia, we need to talk about the allegations you made last week before you left. Some of what you said about our accounting practices was extremely serious. I don't know what you think you've uncovered, but if you have documentation, we'd appreciate the opportunity to understand your perspective. I'm not writing in any official capacity. Off the record, if there's something I need to know, I'm willing to hear it. Nathan. I reread the email 3 times, my pulse drumming in my ears. I had documentation, thousands of spreadsheets showing discrepancies in client billing. I'd spent nearly 6 months collecting them after a late-night realization that the numbers never added up. But I hadn't shared any of it when I stormed out. I'd only hinted, threatened, and then slammed the door behind me. My breath shuddered out. Maybe this was a chance to end it cleanly, to hand over the evidence and walk away knowing I'd done the right thing. But as I closed my laptop, I felt no relief. I felt a gnawing suspicion that they didn't want to understand my perspective. They wanted to get ahead of any fallout and bury the truth before regulators ever heard a word. I got dressed and walked to the kitchen, pouring myself coffee with a trembling hand. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Kayla, my best friend since college. She'd stood by me the day I left, promising she'd help however she could.
Kayla. Hey.
You okay? I've been thinking about you all morning. I typed back. I'm not sure. Nathan emailed. Wants to talk about what I said. Kayla, you going to meet him? I hesitated. Maybe. I don't trust him. Kayla. Then don't go alone. You know how they are. I set my phone down and rubbed my forehead. She was right. Blackridge always played dirty. If I went in blind, they'd twist everything I said. But if I didn't go at all, I might never get closure. By noon, I decided. If they wanted to talk, I'd give them the chance. But I'd go prepared, and I wouldn't let them intimidate me. I spent hours gathering the files I'd hidden on an encrypted drive. Each spreadsheet felt like a relic of my own undoing, proof that the company I'd invested 6 years of my life in was rotten to its core. As I worked, I felt something like resolve replacing the fear. My decision was no longer just about my own vindication. It was about every junior consultant forced to fudge numbers, every client overbilled, every employee who'd been pushed out for asking questions. That evening, I called Kayla. Will you come with me? I asked as soon as she picked up. Of course, she said without hesitation. Where and when? I gave her the details. The meeting would be the next morning, in the old brick building where Blackridge leased extra office space for sensitive discussions. The fact they weren't using the main conference room told me all I needed to know. They didn't want witnesses. The night before, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the moment I'd finally snapped, when Tyler Briggs, my smug division lead, had tried to blame the fraudulent billing on my team. I'm not covering for you anymore, I told him, voice ringing through the glass walls. I'm done being your scapegoat. You'll regret this, he'd hissed. Maybe he'd been right. Maybe tomorrow would be the moment my life imploded. But I also knew there was no turning back. Once you see corruption up close, you either stay silent or you fight it. I'd made my choice. The next morning, Kayla picked me up at 7. The July heat was already creeping in as we pulled into the lot behind the brick building. My palms were slick with sweat. You ready? She asked, squeezing my hand. No, I said honestly. But I'm going in anyway. We walked together through the side entrance. Nathan was waiting in the corridor, a tall silhouette in a charcoal suit.
He looked exhausted.
For a moment, I wondered if he'd ever been on my side at all. Olivia, he greeted, voice low. I'm glad you came. I studied his face. The fine lines around his eyes were deeper than I remembered. He gestured toward a small conference room. Can we talk privately? He asked. Kayla stepped closer. I'm staying. Nathan hesitated, then nodded. We sat. He folded his hands on the table. Before you say anything, he began, I need you to understand. I'm not here to threaten you. I want to find out if there's a way to avoid this getting worse. I took a breath. Worse for whom? For everyone, he said. The partners are in a panic. If what you said is true, they're exposed. I met his gaze steadily. It is true. He nodded slowly. Then you know this is going to burn the company down. I felt something sharp twist in my chest. Relief, vindication, and grief for the years I'd wasted. Then let it burn, I whispered. By the end of the meeting, Nathan had a copy of my files. Kayla and I walked out into the heat, our footsteps echoing on the concrete. My heart felt strangely lighter. You did it, Kayla said quietly. Not yet, I said. But I will. Over the next week, the consequences began to unfold. Whispers of an impending investigation spread through industry circles. I started getting calls from former colleagues, some pleading with me to stay quiet, others thanking me for having the courage they never found. On Friday morning, the email I'd been bracing for arrived. Blackridge Consulting is under federal investigation. I sat alone in my kitchen, reading the words over and over. My hands were steady, my breathing even. I knew, in that moment, that the life I'd known was gone forever. I spent the rest of that day reflecting. Yes, I'd quit in the worst way possible, shouting accusations, walking away with nothing but a battered sense of purpose. But I'd also done something that mattered. I'd refused to be complicit. I'd chosen truth over comfort. Even if it cost me everything, I'd do it again. I thought I'd felt the full force of shock when I pressed send on that resignation email, but nothing compared to this moment. My heart jackhammered as I stared at the monitor in my apartment, a cold, acidic dread pouring into my stomach. There it was, broadcast on every local business news outlet and now syndicated on national channels too. In crisp, brutal clarity, Halcyon Dynamics files for bankruptcy amid allegations of fraud and massive employee exodus. I clutched the arm of my chair so hard my knuckles whitened. On screen, a reporter stood outside the main glass tower I'd trudged into every morning for 8 miserable years. The windows were dark, the lobby abandoned except for uniformed security. She was describing, in dry, efficient tones, how a whistleblower had come forward with evidence of years of unethical accounting practices, undisclosed debts, and retaliatory terminations. And I knew in the marrow of my bones, that my meltdown had triggered all of this. I'd imagined my dramatic exit might cause a stir, some gossip, some tense meetings, maybe even a few HR investigations. But this? Entire livelihoods upended, a company valued at billions crumbling in real time. My phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again, in an unrelenting cascade of notifications. Texts, emails, missed calls, everyone I'd ever worked with, everyone who'd ever heard about me. I felt like I was in a fishbowl, the entire city pressing their faces against the glass to see what I'd do next. I picked up the phone, thumb hovering over my best friend Josh's name. But before I could tap it, a different number flashed across the screen. Victoria Gray. My former boss, the woman whose voice I'd hear in my nightmares, telling me I'd never be more than a replaceable cog. Some twisted part of me wanted to decline her call. Another part, the one still desperate for closure, pressed accept. "Ethan," she said, her voice oddly brittle. "You did this." The accusation stabbed deeper than I expected. "I didn't falsify financial statements," I said quietly. "I just told the truth about what I saw." "You destroyed us," she spat. "And for what? Because you didn't get your precious promotion? Because you had a tantrum?" For a moment, the old guilt returned, the reflex to apologize, to smooth everything over. But then I thought about every late night, every time I swallowed my principles to survive another day under her thumb. "No," I said, voice steady, "because it was wrong. And everyone deserved to know." "You think you're a hero? You're just—" I hung up. I didn't need to hear the rest. I turned back to the TV, just in time to see the cameras pan across the crowd gathered outside the building. Employees in wrinkled suits and stunned faces, some crying, others shouting into their phones. And then, in the middle of it all, a familiar figure, Marcus. He was talking to a reporter, gesturing angrily, holding up a sheaf of papers. I leaned in, trying to read his lips. It looked like he was saying, "Always knew something wasn't right. This is what happens when you punish good people." My hands trembled. Maybe I hadn't been the only one with doubts all those years. Maybe I'd simply been the first to act. Another headline scrolled across the screen. "Former senior analyst's resignation video goes viral. Millions view allegations of corruption." I'd almost forgotten the video I recorded that night. In my rage, I'd hit upload to every platform I could think of. It had felt like screaming into the void. Now, it was the spark that lit the fire. A knock rattled my apartment door. I swallowed hard, peering through the peephole. Detectives. 2 of them, badges clipped to their belts, solemn expressions. "Mr. Ethan Cole," one called through the door. I opened it, heart slamming against my ribs. "Yes. We'd like to ask you a few questions about Halcyon Dynamics' financial records." For a moment, I thought I might pass out. My vision tightened to a tunnel, my breath coming shallow and fast. "Am I in trouble?" I croaked. The taller detective shook his head.
No.
"You're not a suspect. You're a key witness." Relief and dread mingled, sour on my tongue. "May we come in?" I stepped back to let them enter. As they settled onto my threadbare sofa, the reality hit me in full. This was bigger than any petty office feud, any personal vendetta. The entire company was being dismantled, and my words, my meltdown, were the first domino. "Mr. Cole," the shorter detective began, flipping open a notebook, "can you walk us through exactly what you witnessed in the weeks before you left?" I met his gaze and nodded slowly. "Yes," I whispered. "I can." The next 3 hours blurred past in a haze of questions, notes, and reliving every bitter memory. When the detectives finally stood to leave, the taller one paused by the door. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. A lot of people were too scared to speak up. After they left, I collapsed onto the sofa, exhausted. I stared at the ceiling, adrenaline still thundering in my veins. I thought about the other employees, the ones who hadn't known, the ones who had believed in the company. I thought about the innocent staff who were now unemployed. I thought about the emails pouring in from journalists, lawyers, strangers thanking me for exposing the truth. And I thought about the man I'd been only a few weeks ago, terrified, desperate, convinced I had no power. In this moment, everything crystallized. I had been terrified to stand up. But I'd done it anyway. And nothing would ever be the same. I remember sitting on the worn leather couch in my small apartment, my hands still trembling from everything that had happened. It was the first time in years that I could hear my own thoughts without the constant drone of corporate chaos buzzing in my ears. The news of Halberton & Co.'s collapse had spread faster than I'd ever imagined. The company I had once believed held all the power in my life was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a blip in the business headlines that people would forget in a few weeks. I stared at the stack of letters and official notices piled on my coffee table, bankruptcy filings, legal notices, severance statements. The executives had tried to blame the downfall on market conditions, on competition, on everything but themselves. But everyone knew the truth by now. They were sloppy, cruel, and corrupt. My resignation had been the first domino, and my public accusations had shaken loose all the skeletons they thought were buried forever. A knock at the door startled me. For a second, I considered not answering. I was tired of reporters, lawyers, and former coworkers trying to pull me back into the mess. But when I opened the door, it wasn't any of them. It was Melissa, holding 2 coffees and looking at me with the same worried expression she'd worn the day she'd found me packing my box. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I nodded and stepped aside. She set the cups down and took a seat, her eyes scanning my living room as if she couldn't believe how quiet it was. "You really did it," she whispered after a moment. "You tore it all down." "It wasn't just me," I said. "The place was already rotting. I just pulled back the curtain." She laughed under her breath. "You always said it would end like this. I just didn't believe it." I picked up my coffee and held it in both hands. I didn't believe it either. Not really. But now, I don't know. It feels like I've been waiting my whole life for this, and I didn't even know it. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant hum of traffic. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. "I think so," I said truthfully. "I don't regret it."
And I didn't.
Even with the uncertainty ahead of me, even with no clear plan for what came next, I felt lighter. Freer. I'd spent so many years convincing myself I was trapped, that I needed that paycheck, that I had no other options. But all it had taken was one act of defiance, one spectacular, career-ending resignation, to show me that the walls I thought were closing in on me were just illusions. Over the next few days, I watched from a distance as the fallout spread. Several former colleagues reached out, some to thank me, some to curse me. A few were caught in the legal net that tightened around Halliburton's senior management. Investigators dug up fraudulent accounting, falsified safety reports, and all the other abuses I'd hinted at when I quit. It turned out my resignation had made regulators finally pay attention. One evening, my phone buzzed with a message from David, of all people.
"You were right." That was all it said.
But somehow, it felt like the most honest thing he'd ever written to me. Weeks passed. The media frenzy died down. I started to breathe again. I began making lists of things I'd always wanted to do, but never had the nerve to try. I looked into consulting gigs, maybe even teaching. For the first time in a decade, I felt like my life was mine. Not a performance for people who didn't care if I burned out or collapsed as long as I met their quotas. Melissa and I met up regularly. Sometimes, we talked about what had happened. Other times, we pretended the last year hadn't existed. Slowly, she admitted she was planning to leave the corporate world too. She didn't want to end up like David, clinging to a title that meant nothing. One afternoon, we took a walk around the city park. The cherry trees were in bloom, the air soft and warm. Melissa stopped to watch a child chasing bubbles across the grass. "Do you ever wish you'd left earlier?" she asked. "All the time," I said. "But then again, I don't think I could have done it any other way." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. When I finally got home, I stood in the doorway for a long time, looking around my living room. It wasn't much, just a rented space filled with mismatched furniture. But it was mine. No more sterile glass walls. No more fake smiles and poisonous politics. Just a place to start over. That night, I sat down at my laptop and opened a blank document. I didn't know exactly what I was going to write. Maybe a memoir. Maybe just a letter to myself. All I knew was that I needed to put it into words. Everything I'd been through. Everything I'd learned. I started typing. I quit my job in the worst way possible. I thought it would ruin me. Instead, it set me free. And it was true. For the first time, I understood that sometimes you have to burn everything down to see what's worth saving. That destruction can be the first step toward something better. The final days of Halliburton and Company were ugly and chaotic. But in their collapse, I found my own rebirth. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I'd figure out what came next. But tonight, I was finally at peace.